Brainwashing is one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation. It conjures images of radical cults with unwavering followers or authoritarian regimes bending citizens to their will. But what exactly is brainwashing? And how do cults control minds? In this deep exploration, we'll analyze how cult leaders methodically erode individual identity and indoctrinate followers using dark psychology tactics. By understanding the psychology of brainwashing, from emotional exploitation to mental control, we arm ourselves with knowledge to recognize and resist these coercive techniques. In this informative and professional analysis, we'll uncover the step-by-step process cults use to take total control of the human mind, illustrating each stage with research and real examples. Prepare to learn how ordinary people can be transformed into devoted followers under the spell of charismatic manipulators. Brainwashing, also known as coercive persuasion, is a systematic effort to radically change a person's beliefs and perceptions against their will. It involves manipulating someone's thoughts and actions such that they adopt new loyalties and ideologies that they might not have accepted freely. The term itself became popular during the Cold War. For example, reports of Chinese and North Korean camps reprogramming prisoners of war drew global attention. Today, brainwashing is often associated with cults and extremist groups, where leaders use intense indoctrination techniques to override followers' free will and instill unquestioning obedience. At its core, brainwashing works by controlling the victim's environment and social interactions. By isolating individuals from former friends, family, and outside information, cults can cut off alternative perspectives and relentlessly bombard recruits with their own doctrine. The goal is to break the person's existing identity and resistance, then rebuild them as a loyal adherent. As Britannica summarizes, the process involves destroying old loyalties, demonstrating that the person's prior beliefs are incorrect, and developing a new loyalty and obedience to the group or leader. In practice, this entails a mix of psychological tactics, from peer pressure and social rewards to fear, guilt, and even physical deprivation, all designed to wear down critical thinking and induce compliance. Importantly, brainwashing is not sci-fi mind control via machines. It's accomplished through everyday human psychology, leveraged in extreme ways. Cult mind control does not turn people into mindless robots overnight. Rather, it's a gradual, step-by-step process of psychological manipulation. As we'll see, cult leaders and authoritarian figures methodically use emotional and mental control techniques, often dubbed dark psychology, to gain total influence. And contrary to the myth that only weak or unintelligent people fall victim, research shows that under the right isolating and pressurized conditions, even average individuals can be broken down by these methods. This understanding sets the stage for examining how cults brainwash their followers in detail. Before a cult can brainwash someone, they first need to get them through the door. Cults typically target individuals who are emotionally vulnerable or seeking answers. People going through difficult life transitions, loneliness, personal loss, or uncertainty can be more susceptible to a cult's appeal. The cult presents itself as the answer, a tight-knit community offering belonging, purpose, and acceptance. Recruitment often begins with flattery and affection, a tactic known as love bombing. New prospects are showered with excessive praise, warmth, and attention by cult members, making them feel incredibly special and understood. Imagine someone who feels lost or isolated, suddenly surrounded by a group that celebrates them and claims to share their hopes and struggles. This experience can be overwhelming and disarming. The recruit thinks, "I've finally found people who truly care about me." The burst of unconditional validation boosts their attachment to the group and lowers their defenses. Psychology experts note that notorious cult leaders like Jim Jones and Charles Manson used love bombing early on. It's a powerful emotional hook that gets targets to start letting their guard down and coming back for more interaction. During this phase, the cult deliberately hides its true intentions. Recruitment often happens in casual settings, chatting on social media, at self-help seminars, prayer groups, or social clubs, environments that feel safe and normal. The person likely doesn't even realize a cult is inviting them. It may be presented as a philosophical group, a self-improvement course, or a spiritual community. By keeping the initial approach friendly and non-threatening, cults avoid triggering suspicion. Skilled recruiters ask lots of questions and listen intently to the target's fears, dreams, and frustrations. In doing so, they identify the person's emotional needs and tailor their pitch to promise exactly what the person is seeking, be it meaning, family, security, health, or success. This personalized seduction is part of the dark psychology of influence, exploiting vulnerabilities to draw people in deeper. Once a new recruit is intrigued or involved, cults move to isolate them from outside influences. Isolation, what psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton called milieu control, is a cornerstone of effective brainwashing. The cult aims to become the center of the person's reality, so it must eliminate competing voices like skeptical family, old friends, or mainstream media. Gradually, the group will encourage, or enforce, behaviors that distance the member from their previous life. This can start subtly, spending more time at cult events, going on retreats, or living with fellow members. Over time, it escalates to quitting jobs, cutting off contact with non-believers, and even relocating to commune-like compounds owned by the cult. By controlling the physical and social environment, the cult leader can flood the members' senses with one message while blocking out dissent. Members may be discouraged or forbidden from consuming outside news, books, or websites that contradict the group's teachings. In some extreme cases, mail or phone calls are monitored or cut off entirely. The result is an echo chamber. The recruit hears only the cult's perspective, from the time they wake up to when they sleep. Everyone around them is singing the same praises of the leader or ideology. Without alternative viewpoints, the cult's ideas start to feel like the only truth. This isolation extends to one's internal dialogue as well. Cults use techniques to keep members so busy or mentally occupied that there's little time to critically reflect. Long seminars, repetitive chanting or prayer, constant group activities, all these can serve to overwhelm independent thought. In Lifton's study of totalist regimes, he noted that even discouraging a person from thinking incorrect thoughts is part of milieu control. If members start to doubt or question internally, they are taught to view those thoughts as personal failures, e.g., sin, lack of faith, negative thinking, and to suppress them. Some groups introduce thought-stopping rituals. Whenever a negative thought arises, the member might recite a mantra, pray, or even verbally chastise themselves to drown it out. Over time, this trains the person to avoid dangerous, independent thoughts altogether, staying safely within the mental confines set by the cult. The power of isolation and brainwashing cannot be overstated. Classic research shows that social consensus strongly influences our sense of reality. In Solomon Asch's famous experiments, the majority's wrong opinion led 75% of people to deny obvious facts at least once, just to conform. Cults leverage this effect by constructing an entire social world that agrees on the cult's narrative. When everyone around you insists the leader is divine, or that outsiders are evil, it starts to feel true, especially if you have no close confidant left to say otherwise. Cut off from anchors to your former identity, family, lifelong friends, familiar social norms, you become increasingly dependent on the cult for guidance on how to think, feel, and act. This dependence is exactly what the cult leader wants, as it paves the way for deeper manipulation. With the recruit cut off from external support, the cult begins remolding the person's identity and beliefs. The next step in brainwashing is to break down the individual's resistance through a combination of commands, rewards, and punishments. Cult leaders demand absolute obedience and humility from followers. They often establish a strict hierarchy, the leader at the top as an infallible authority, and the new recruit at the bottom expected to prove their loyalty. Through explicit rules or implicit pressure, the recruit learns that compliance leads to praise or privilege, while any disobedience leads to criticism or worse. One common method is a carrot and stick approach: social rewards for cooperation and harsh consequences for dissent. On the reward side, a member who obeys commands might receive public recognition, increased status within the group, or closer access to the leader's inner circle. The cult love bombing often continues in this phase for those who stay in line. "You're doing so well, we're so proud of your dedication." Positive reinforcement like this feeds the person's desire to belong and please the group. But if the person questions authority or fails to perform as expected, punishments swiftly follow. These can start as psychological punishments, scolding, shaming, or ostracizing the individual in front of peers. Group criticism sessions are common. Some cults force members to confess their doubts or mistakes, then subject them to group ridicule or guilt until they repent. This tactic leverages the person's fear of rejection. Being chastised by the very community they seek acceptance from is deeply unsettling. As Margaret Singer noted in her research, cults maintain a system of rewards and punishments that keeps followers off balance and anxious to comply. Over time, punishments may escalate to physical and mental exhaustion techniques. Depriving members of sleep, proper nutrition, or privacy wears down their willpower. Exhaustion makes people more suggestible. It's harder to think critically or resist demands when you're drained. Some cults work members long hours on group tasks or enforce strict, military-like schedules. Others may intentionally disrupt sleep with late-night meetings or chanting sessions. The result is a disoriented, fatigued state in which the individual is more likely to accept the cult's directives without protest. Additionally, cults often induce feelings of guilt and unworthiness as a manipulation tool. They convince members that any struggle or negative feeling they have is due to their own inadequacy or impure thoughts, not because of the cult's extreme rules. Many groups require members to constantly confess their shortcomings, a practice that not only exposes intimate vulnerabilities, but also instills shame. By confessing sins or doubts, followers inadvertently hand the leadership ammunition to use against them. For example, if you admit you secretly miss your family, the cult might later punish you for divided loyalties, or use that information to further sever that attachment. Your longing for family is a weakness to overcome. Lifton identified confession as a key step in thought reform, creating a cycle where personal guilt is alleviated only by conforming more and more to the group's demands. These tactics, obedience training, public humiliation, exhaustion, and guilt, serve a clear purpose: to break the person's independent will. Over days and weeks of such treatment, the recruit experiences powerlessness, fear, and dependency. They begin to feel that escape is impossible. Their critical thinking is so clouded and their self-esteem so eroded that they truly believe they need the group to survive, or to be a good person. In psychological terms, this is akin to learned helplessness. A vivid analogy comes from a former cult member who likened her state to that of an elephant chained to a pole. Initially, it pulls and resists, but eventually it's conditioned to think escape is hopeless. Later, even a rope can hold it, because mentally the elephant has given up trying. Similarly, a brainwashed individual becomes resigned and compliant, no longer questioning why they follow orders. They simply do as they're told. Once a cult has broken down a person's resistance, it can start rebuilding them with a new identity. The follower is now primed to absorb the group's indoctrination, a new belief system or reality constructed by the cult. This often involves instilling an extreme, polarized worldview that glorifies the cult and demonizes everything outside it. Central to this is what Lifton called the total ideology, or exclusive belief system. Cults typically promote a philosophy that claims to have all the answers. It could be religious, only our church knows the true path to salvation; political, our movement alone can save the country; or even personal. This self-help guru is the sole key to success, and you must surrender completely to their method. Whatever the content, the ideology is presented as absolute truth, perfect, sacred, and non-negotiable. In a cult, there is no room for questioning the doctrine. The leader or doctrine is always right, and any contradiction is blamed on the follower's misunderstanding or flawed faith. A powerful tool here is the use of loaded language and jargon. Cults often develop their own insider vocabulary, simple black and white terms that encapsulate complex ideas in ways that favor the cult's narrative. This serves two purposes. It makes it hard to even think outside the cult's framework, since language shapes thought, and it creates an in-group feeling of special knowledge. For instance, a cult might label all critics or ex-members as evil deceivers or lost souls, and loyal members as enlightened or chosen. These stark labels discourage nuance. Anyone who doubts is simply a sinner or traitor, and problems are because you didn't follow the one true way. By redefining words and controlling the language, cults literally control how their members think. Over time, members may even struggle to converse with outsiders because their mindset is so steeped in the cult's terminology and concepts. Inside the cult bubble, logic gets twisted into a closed loop that always circles back to the group's beliefs. Lifton described this as a closed system of logic, impervious to outside critique. If something good happens, it's proof the cult is right. If something bad happens, that too can be explained by blaming impure thoughts or outside enemies. Any contradictory evidence is either reframed as support for the doctrine or simply dismissed as lies. Facts no longer matter. Only the cult's narrative does. Members are taught to distrust anything not vetted by the group. Conspiracy theories might flourish, and paranoia about the outside world often increases. E.g., the whole world is against us, only we see the truth. Inside this manufactured reality, followers undergo a kind of identity transformation. They often get new roles or even new names within the group, symbolizing the break from their old self. Their past beliefs and experiences are reinterpreted or rejected entirely. Lifton called this doctrine over person, meaning the cult's doctrine overrides personal conscience or memories. If you recall loving your parents, the cult might teach you that was false love and that the group is your true family now. If you had skills or education, they might be belittled unless they serve the cult's goals. The person's sense of self steadily shifts to align with the cult prototype: obedient, devoted, unquestioning. Members often parrot the leader's teachings word for word, showing how thoroughly they've internalized the new ideology. A striking sign of successful indoctrination is when the follower accepts even the most bizarre or extreme beliefs as normal. This often happens gradually. The cult introduces mild, agreeable ideas at first, and only later do the more outrageous tenets come to light, sometimes not until the person is in too deep to easily leave. For example, Scientology famously doesn't tell new members about its sci-fi cosmology, like alien souls and volcanoes, until they've invested significant time and money. By then, the recruit has accepted so many smaller tenets and undergone so much conditioning that they'll rationalize the absurdities. As one former cult member put it, after a while, things that seemed preposterous seem normal. The gradual indoctrination coupled with group consensus can make even the strangest claims feel true. Reality itself is redefined within the cult's confines. Moreover, cults often instill an us versus them mindset. They depict the outside world as dangerous, sinful, or deluded, and the cult as the sole possessor of enlightenment or salvation. This is sometimes reinforced with doomsday predictions or conspiracy theories, e.g., the world will end and only our group will be saved, or outsiders are agents of evil trying to stop us. By heightening fear of the outside, the cult further cements loyalty. Members believe leaving the group or trusting outsiders could lead to disaster. Sociologist John Laughlin's study of the Unification Church, the Moonies, found that new converts were subjected to 7 steps of increasing social isolation and mindset change, culminating in seeing the group as their only safe haven. Ultimately, cult members perceive that their entire reality and identity are bound up in the group. There is no life or truth possible outside of it. One of the most powerful psychological weapons cults use in brainwashing is fear. By this stage, the cult has isolated the individual and started remolding their reality. Now it locks in control by alternating terror with moments of relief or affection. This creates a trauma bond between the follower and the leader or group. The dynamic is comparable to an abusive relationship. The abuser causes fear and pain, but is also the one the victim turns to for comfort, creating a perverse bond of dependency. Cults deliberately arouse fear in multiple ways. They may stoke fear of external threats, such as impending apocalypse, evil conspiracies, or hateful persecutors poised to attack the group. Internally, they instill fear by threatening punishment or expulsion for disobedience. Members might constantly worry, will I be exiled and doomed if I don't measure up? In many cults, leaving or even questioning is portrayed as the worst fate. You'll be damned spiritually or harmed by enemies, or at the very least, you'll lose the only family you have. This ever-present fear keeps followers in line. As one analysis describes, different groups use different fear-arousing themes, from the oncoming apocalypse to fear of the devil, fear of government persecution, etc. But the common thread is the leader positions themselves as the sole savior who can protect members from these threats. What makes this tactic especially effective is the paradox of the safe haven. Psychologist John Bowlby's attachment theory tells us that when people are scared, they instinctively seek closeness to a trusted caregiver or safe haven. Cults exploit this by ensuring that the only perceived safe haven is the cult itself. The leader or group that induces fear simultaneously offers love, support, and salvation. This is why cults often oscillate between intimidation and kindness. A member might be harshly rebuked one day, and then hugged and reassured the next. Terror followed by love bombing. The result is deeply confusing. The person is trapped between approach and avoidance. They fear the leader, but also crave the leader's approval and protection, since all other support systems have been cut off. Over time, this forms a disorganized attachment, as researchers Mary Main and others have noted. The follower develops an emotional bond to the very source of their trauma, because that source is also presented as their refuge. Psychologically, they enter a state of learned dependency, where they feel they cannot survive without the group. Their ability to think critically about the situation is derailed by chronic stress and fear. In effect, logical thinking shuts down when panic sets in, and the cult's irrational explanations, however far-fetched, can then be accepted because the person desperately wants to believe the leader will keep them safe. This trauma bonding is seen in various abusive contexts, from domestic violence to kidnappings, Stockholm Syndrome, and in cults it is deliberately cultivated. Members become emotionally addicted to the cycle of threat and relief. They may endure shocking abuse yet still defend the leader fervently. For example, survivors of extreme cults have reported feeling that I would have died or killed for the leader at the height of their indoctrination. In one case, a cult member neglected her own children and witnessed crimes, yet recalled, I remember feeling like I would take a bullet for the leader. This illustrates how complete the psychological domination can become. Self-preservation and personal morals are sacrificed in favor of fulfilling the leader's demands, however irrational. Another dimension of fear is the concept of dispensed existence, as Lifton termed it. Cults often teach that only those in the group are truly alive or worthy. All outsiders are doomed or lesser. Thus, if you leave, your existence is forfeit, metaphorically or even literally in doomsday cults. Apostates, those who leave, might be declared evil or cursed, serving as scarecrows to frighten remaining members. The message is clear. Salvation, safety, and even your identity only exist inside the group. Stepping outside means annihilation or irredeemable loss. This belief amplifies the fear of leaving to phobic levels. Ex-members often report that even when they doubted the group, an irrational terror of harm or hell kept them from walking away. It can take former cultists years to shake those implanted phobias. In summary, by weaving an inescapable web of fear and dependency, cults attach followers to the group at a primal emotional level. The person's fight or flight instincts get hijacked. They feel they must cling to the group for survival, even as the group itself is the source of their trauma. This is the dark psychology of trauma bonding that cements the leader's control over a follower's mind. When all these elements, isolation, breakdown, indoctrination, and trauma bonding have done their work, the cult achieves total control over the follower. The end goal of cult brainwashing is to create what researcher Alexandra Stein calls deployable followers. These are individuals who will override their own needs, critical judgment, and even survival instincts to obey the leader or further the group's goals. In this extreme state, a cult member's identity is almost entirely merged with the cult. They act as an instrument of the leader's will. Several red flags signal that this level of control has been reached. One is the follower's unquestioning loyalty in the face of evidence of wrongdoing. For example, members might be aware of, or even directly experience, the leader's abuse, lies, or hypocrisy, yet remain fiercely loyal. In Stein's research, many followers knew of criminal acts, fraud, abuse, etc., within the cult, but were so conditioned that they rationalized or ignored them. The totalist ideology had taught them that anything the leader does is for a higher purpose, or that those harmed deserved it as enemies or weaklings. This mental gymnastics allows the cult member to maintain the belief that the group is infallible, and that any doubts are personal failures. Another sign is that the person will follow orders that gravely harm themselves or others, which previously would have been unthinkable. In notorious historical cases, we've seen cult devotees commit mass suicide or violence on command. For instance, over 900 members of Jim Jones's People's Temple drank poison on his order, many even administering it to their own children. In the Manson family, followers brutally murdered strangers at Charles Manson's behest, believing it to be a higher calling. In Heaven's Gate, 39 people willingly poisoned themselves en masse in hopes of a spaceship salvation. These extreme outcomes underscore how complete the mental takeover can be. Fundamental survival instincts, like the will to live or protect one's offspring, were subjugated by the indoctrinated belief in the leader or prophecy. Even in less extreme scenarios, fully brainwashed members relinquish all personal agency to the cult. They may turn over all their money and assets, allow the group to choose their spouse or sexual partners, perform free labor tirelessly, and cut off lifelong relationships, all at the leader's direction. Their day-to-day choices, clothing, diet, housing, etc., are micromanaged by the cult's rules. Ultimately, as Lifton noted, in a cult's ultimate stage of control there is no privacy and ultimately no free will for members. The cult owns their lives. It's important to realize this transformation doesn't imply the person is in a trance or zombie-like state at all times. On the surface, they might appear relatively normal, going about tasks with conviction, but their mind has been systematically conditioned to prioritize the cult above all else. They have internalized the cult's belief system so deeply that it guides their every decision. The cult's voice has replaced their own. As Lifton described in his 8 criteria of thought reform, the individual's old self is reinterpreted through the cult doctrine, and any independent values have been suppressed or reshaped to serve the group. This level of control is the culmination of the dark psychological process. It highlights a chilling fact. Under powerful social and psychological influence, ordinary people can be compelled to do extraordinarily destructive things. Experiments in social psychology, like Stanley Milgram's obedience study, showed that a majority of average people were willing to administer what they thought were painful, even fatal electric shocks to an innocent person, simply because an authority figure instructed them to. Cultic brainwashing amplifies this dynamic manifold. The authority's commands are constant and backed by an entire controlled environment. Given that, it's less surprising how people in cults might carry out orders that outsiders view as heinous or irrational. The members' free will has been step-by-step conditioned away, replaced with a reflexive obedience and a belief that they are doing the right or necessary thing. Faced with how intense and comprehensive cult brainwashing can be, a pressing question is, can someone ever break free once fully indoctrinated? The answer is yes, but it's rarely easy. Many cult members do manage to leave and recover, but often only after a significant intervention or life event that shakes their faith in the group. One key to breaking brainwashing is time away from the cult's influence. As long as a person remains in the high-control environment, their critical thinking is suppressed by constant pressure and fear. However, if circumstances force a separation, even temporarily, the mental fog can begin to lift. For example, some former cultists report that being hospitalized or jailed, thus physically separated from the group, gave them a chance to think independently again. In one case, a recruit left an extremist political cult after being imprisoned in Egypt, where he unexpectedly encountered kindness from supposed enemies and had time to reflect, causing him to question the cult's doctrine. Sometimes reality intrudes in undeniable ways. Repeated failed prophecies, or seeing the leader commit blatant wrongs, can crack the veneer of infallibility. If a doomsday date comes and goes without incident, a common occurrence in cult history, some members may wake up to the deception. Others have left when the cult leadership demanded a sacrifice too extreme that crossed a personal red line. For instance, ordering a parent to give up their child, which was the final straw for one member of the Newman Tendency cult. These moments of clarity can give a person the courage to exit. Support from outside can also be crucial. Often it takes a trusted other reaching in, perhaps a family member, friend, or exit counselor, to help a cult victim recognize the manipulation. This must be done carefully, since direct confrontation of the beliefs can backfire. The person's indoctrination has built-in defenses against listening to critics. However, gentle encouragement to take a break, reminding them of life before the cult, or showing consistent, unconditional love, can plant seeds of doubt about the cult's us versus them narrative. In some cases, ex-members or specialized therapists assist in deprogramming, a process that may involve intensive therapy and education to undo the phobias and distortions implanted by the group. Deprogramming had controversial beginnings, with some forcible interventions in the 1970s, but modern approaches focus on voluntary exit counseling and long-term psychological support. Recovery is often slow. Even after physically leaving the cult, mental emancipation takes time because the person has to rebuild their identity and belief system. Former members frequently struggle with guilt, confusion, and trauma. They might even miss the cult initially, much like someone might miss an abusive partner, because of the trauma bond and the sense of purpose the group provided. Counseling, support groups of fellow ex-cultists, and sometimes medication for anxiety or depression can all be part of the healing journey. Understanding this recovery process highlights just how thorough the brainwashing was. It literally changes a person's mindset, and undoing that requires patience and care. The good news is many people do reclaim their minds. They often become outspoken advocates, warning others about coercive groups. Their stories reinforce a final lesson. Education and awareness are the best defenses against brainwashing. Individuals and society as a whole become less vulnerable to cult recruitment when we know the red flags of manipulation and the tactics of undue influence. The psychology of brainwashing reveals a sobering truth about human behavior. Under certain conditions of isolation, stress, and manipulation, ordinary people can be led to believe and do extraordinary things. Cults methodically exploit emotional needs and cognitive weaknesses, love-bombing the lonely, indoctrinating the ignorant, intimidating the fearful, until they forge followers who will truly give up their own minds in service to the group. Through techniques of dark psychology, from controlling information and eroding identity to inducing fear-based dependency, cult leaders turn personal vulnerabilities into powerful levers of control. Yet, by studying these methods, we also illuminate the path to resistance. Knowledge truly is power here. When you know that a sudden barrage of affection might be love bombing, you become more cautious of a group that seems too good to be true. Recognizing that any group which tries to sever your connections to family and friends does not have your best interests at heart is vital. Healthy relationships never require total isolation. Understanding the psychology of coercive persuasion helps inoculate us against it. We become quicker to spot the signs of thought control, high-pressure tactics, and dogmatic us versus them worldviews. In an age where cult-like dynamics can emerge not just in fringe religious groups but also in political movements, online communities, and personal relationships, this insight is more important than ever. Emotional and mental control can wear many faces, from a charismatic self-help mentor demanding absolute loyalty to a hate group online cultivating conspiratorial fear. The lessons from cult brainwashing apply broadly to any scenario where an individual or organization seeks to dominate others' thinking for their own gain. Ultimately, the story of how cults control minds is a cautionary tale of human vulnerability, but also of human resilience. Many who have been through the deepest depths of brainwashing have managed to climb back out, reclaim their autonomy, and help others do the same. Their journeys underscore that the human mind, while malleable, is also remarkably resilient once truth and critical thought are restored. In conclusion, the psychology of brainwashing teaches us both how fragile and how strong we can be. It shines a light on the dark strategies of manipulation so that we can better protect ourselves and our loved ones from those who would exploit our minds. By fostering open communication, critical thinking, and healthy skepticism, we build an environment where the seeds of cultic control cannot easily take root. In the end, understanding these dark tactics is not meant to instill fear, but to empower, to ensure that each person remains the author of their own mind, free from undue influence and coercion. Knowledge and awareness are the ultimate antidote to brainwashing, allowing truth and individuality to triumph over manipulation.